I suppose it would be appropriate if we had some more of the older folk here to start off with a greeting of power to the people. You see what I mean? Not one person answer. We're in the wrong crowd. Power to the people! Power to the people! Power to the people! We have, I don't think we have had an occasion like this for quite some time. 3 years ago in 2015, when I was functioning with the National Trust, we had a week of celebrations to mark the 45th anniversary of the emergency. And in a way, I keep questioning myself because it seems as though it might convey the impression that we are celebrating the state of emergency. But the 21st of April, Tuesday the 21st of on the way at the privilege of a occasion on Nelson Island. People have had varying experiences. Recently, we had opportunities for some persons to speak of their capture in the early hours of the morning of that day. Starting off with Brother Kafra Kambon, who conveniently located himself, he and his mother and his brothers, in an apartment on Gordon Street in Port of Spain. Now, those of you who know Port of Spain well, you know that the Royal Jail is bounded on the north by Gordon Street, on the east by Frederick Street, on the south by New Street, I think it is on the south, and Pembroke Street on the west. So when the police, members of the police force, it was still the police force then, decided to acquire some company, they just drove out of the front gate of Royal Jail, made the block, pick up Cambon and came down the road. They didn't have to go and look for him. He has always been a very helpful person. And by 9 o'clock that morning, there were about 10 of us down in at the Stobles Bay, the headquarters of the Coast Guard in those days. Ifibo, Ayagoro, Quinn Huggins. I don't remember too many of the names now. I remember in 2015 when we started to do a log of the persons who were there, we realized at that time about half of them were no longer with us. But 45 years is a long time. That is almost 2 generations. So a number of them had gone. Recently at a funeral, I met one of the brothers of Pat Emanuel, who was a Grenadian lecturer on campus at the time. But we were trying to get people like Rafiq and some of the other brothers. The only one from that group that I am seeing here this evening is Brother Ibrahim Mahmood. Well, stand up now. Who is that? Yeah. Make sure you keep your left hand down. And unfortunately, Raf at this stage is not in the best of health. But I think arrangements have been made for us to do a telephone link with him during the course of the evening, so at least we could get some words from him. But today is a very significant day for a number of us. Every year on the 21st of April, I get up and wonder what it would have been like if Williams and them didn't make the mistake of trying to lock up people. I remember the 26th of February, a little march, about 50 people, mainly students from on campus, had come into Port of Spain to protest against the Canadian presence and what, at that time, they had detained a number of West Indian students in the Sir George Williams University affair where some computers were damaged. And every time I talk about that, I have to remind people that they were in the computer room at the university. It's now called Concordia University. It was then the Sir George Williams University in Canada. I don't remember what part of Canada. That was never important to me. Montreal, thank you. You see, it's good to have some old people around. And some students had decided to occupy the computer room in protest against the behavior of a certain lecturer who they had deemed as being very racist towards the Canadian students. And the university decided to force them out of the room. And there are several stories talking about how some computers were thrown out of the windows and so on. And I have to do a fact check on that. In those days, we're talking about 1969, computers to serve the university would have been almost as big as this room. Nobody threw any computer through any window. Is that Mr. Jack Kelsol's family? Excuse me, are you? No, I'm just trying to identify who you were. All right. Okay. And on the 26th of February, that was actually in 78, it was the anniversary of an incident that had taken place 1 year before when Hugh Michener, was he the Governor General of Canada? I don't remember what his title was. He had come down, he had come down to the university for the opening of Canada Hall on campus. And yes, Mr. Hugh Michener, yes. And some members of the Guild of Undergraduates, under the leadership of somebody called Geddes Granger, decided that they were not allowing them to come on campus. Now, they were there to commemorate the fact that the Canadian government had built us Canada Hall of Residence. And I remember the day Eric Williams and a number of his ministers and so on with Michener and his party drove up to the south gate of the university with the intention of coming in and celebrating with them. And the students lined themselves across the entrance and tell them that they're not coming in here. And Eric Williams had maintained a very cautious distance between him and Michener. I think of that, so sometimes when you go out to a function and the lady you carried with you is not behaving properly, and you start to feel kind of embarrassed, but you don't want to say anything too loud, so you just try to ease away from her for a little while. But it didn't quite work. And a standoff took place with Michener and them on one side and the Students' Guild on the next side. I see some of our senior guests are here. But just to skip along quickly, 1 year later, on the 26th of February 1970, the students decided to come into Port of Spain to protest again. Now, the few of you who might have been around at that time, are not seeing many people who look like people who would have been around at that time. Oh yes, I'm seeing some gray beards. At that time, Independence Square was referred to as Bankers' Row. You had a row of banks because the Canadian financial presence in the country was very heavy. Where Kentucky is now was the Bank of London and Montreal. No, that was Chase Manhattan. Bank of London and Montreal is where First Citizen is now. But you had Chase Manhattan, Royal Bank of Canada, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. It was about six of them. And the idea was to go to the Canadian High Commission and protest there and then visit the different banks. And then somebody, well, one brother has claimed it, but I've never been able to verify it. One member suggested that they should go and visit the Roman Catholic Cathedral right on Independence Square. I'm not calling anybody name. I had court closed. I never had court closed. You talking about Dabo and them? I was never one of those. But they went into the cathedral. I had already, well, I joined the procession. I used to work at Gordon Grant. I had a nice job and thing, so I was in the accounts department of Aviation Services Limited. Somebody pointed out to me that I was the only black person in the accounts department. I didn't realize that. And when we heard that there was some noise going on, that time they were in front of Royal Bank. So I didn't take up my camera then. I had it though. We walked across, and I walked across just in time to see some brothers picking up Dabo and bringing him down the steps, because he and a policeman named Inspector Fritz had just had a conversation, which by testimony of Mr. Fritz in court, I said, Mr. Dabo, why don't you behave? And Mr. Dabo grabbed my cane and struck me with it. Mr. Dabo at that time was roughly about my size. Fritz was over 200 pounds. And Mr. Dabo grabbed the little cane out of his hand and struck him. Other people got the colors confused, and other people saw Fritz hit Cambon in the center of his head with the cane. But it stunned him. So as he was kind of disoriented, the brothers brought him back out. At that time, there were some big steps leading into our bank. It's in the same place, but it was an old building. And I reached in time to see one of the other brothers, Ralston Granger, who became Dedan Kimati, who is no longer with us. And Dedan was trying to convince Cambon to stay where he was. Don't go back in the little raucous. Dedan was, how big boy? He was about that brother in the stripe shirt there, about that size. I was telling you, Dabo was my size at the time. And I stood in wonder and watched Kafra drag Dedan across the road, up the steps and back into Royal Bank. He was practicing. And after that was finished, they went on them, and then they went into the Roman Catholic Cathedral. And it is said that they went in there and they threw black paint on the statues in the cathedral, and they threw black jerseys and so on over the statues. And eventually they were persuaded to leave the cathedral. And every time we come together, I have to spend at least 2 minutes just cleaning up the raid on the cathedral. Because the next morning they were charged with desecrating the cathedral. And I asked people, where did they get the paint? Where did they get the cloth to put over it? No, I didn't. I left the demonstration shortly after Mr. Dabo's antics. I went back to my work. But all I asked them is, where did they get the paint to do it? Did they stop and run into a hardware and buy paint, or did they come down from UWI with the paint? In those days, that year, the 26th of February was in Lent. Lent had just started. It was a Catholic practice in those days that their statues were draped in black cloth as part of the Lenten ritual. Isn't that true into? I'm sorry. Right, good. Another Roman Catholic has agreed with it. It's all right. But the fact was that when they went in there, by that time they were kind of hyped up, right? And they went in singing, they were shouting. There was no shouts of power to the people then, but there was some shouts of, I remember they were singing a kind of popular song in those days, yeah, something about ganja, sex and ganja, and something or the other, right? Whereas university students, you see, Intro remembers it. La, sex and ganja. It was a lovely little tune at the time, right? Some people took it literally, but not all of us. But they went in there, and to a large part, they sat down in the pews. A few people went. I remember there was a chair that the Archbishop sits in when he's in the cathedral. And one of the brothers went and opened his dashiki and regaled himself there. There was no black paint. Nobody had black paint. That wasn't the purpose of the march. But it became convenient, even though Archbishop Anthony Pantin came and made a declaration after that stating that there was no desecration of the church. The media had already done its job. So the next morning, either Williams or the police service made a very significant error. They decided to lock up some people who were on the demonstration. And I think it's 9 people next morning. I remember Balfour was in his underwear. Cambon had time to dress and so on. That was a different case. Geddes Granger, Balfour, Errol Balfour, but there were 9 of them who were rounded up and charged. They were subsequently charged for desecration of the cathedral, and when they had a couple of days more to think about it, they added on sedition and 1 or 2 other charges. The thought processes were not any faster then. But it is very significant that arrest, in a way, was one of the incidents that made the February Revolution what it was. If they just keep quiet and leave them alone, it's quite likely that it would have continued to have been seen as them fellas from the university coming down and march. Most people outside the university, students, were not particularly interested. But next morning, the sight of people being paraded in court drew people's attention. And when the case was called up and adjourned and they were given their own bail and thing, by the time they came outside, people had started gathering outside the courthouse. And then somebody else, probably the same person who said that he suggested the cathedral, suggested that they should go to Woodford Square and talk to the people. By the time the case was called the following week, there was a crowd of a couple hundred people waiting outside so they could go to Woodford Square and have a chat. And shortly after that, the marches started. 56 days of marches up and down Trinidad and Tobago in the hot sun. Fortunately, it was the early part of the year. We didn't have the rain to contend with, but the sun was hot. And I also take the time sometimes to ask people, what do you think we were eating those on the marches? Because most times, by the time work finished at 4 o'clock, the crowd would know that they're supposed to meet in Woodford Square so they could hear where we're going on march where we're going to march this afternoon. And we marched all over Trinidad and Tobago. There were some high points, like the march to Caroni. There was Basil Davis' funeral in early April when Clifton isn't here. What is the name of the fellow who shoot Basil? Joshua Gordon. The other one, I was mixing up the name with Basil Tobias, who was pushing Aisha out of the road in the Students' March. Joshua Gordon. Clive Nunez has his regimental number and thing. I never got that close to him. But after the rest of the people would say was history. So now that I have the attention of the captive audience, we can get into some of the events for which we are here this afternoon. I haven't seen any of the ex-soldiers. Right. Well, as I said, arrangements have been made for us to link up with I see somebody pointing over there. Is it that there's another one of these soldiers here? They say you no such thing as an ex-soldier. And? When they fix all your head. Please do. All right, so let us get an opportunity to hear a few words from... You can put me in the center now.
The center.
Right.
Brothers and sisters, comrades. Okay. I always wonder where to begin. There's so much sides to this struggle. I was a soldier, I was an NJAC, I was all around. But first I want to start with the name scene. My birth paper marked Brahim Mahmood, 2 Muslim names. When I went to St. Mary's College, they say you're a Christian. My father was a Muslim, my mother was Christian. He, because of his love for her, agreed when they get married to have the children as Christians. So much for this set of Muslim terrorists and intolerant and all of that. It wasn't so. There's still today a lot of Muslims in Trinidad. They intermingled at that time. They married Christian women and all like that. The second part is that the priest say he's a Christian, you have to have a Christian name, and change Brahim to Abraham. And now they're saying they never used to do that, but you have African people named Chinese people named Scott, and all kind of things. But that is that. My introduction into politics, more or less, was in the army. We were always following the international scene. We know about Martin Luther King assassination. We know about Kennedy. Martin Luther King for president, that was a Trinidad scene. Kennedy is the man for them. We were always following the international struggles. We knew about the Black Panther movement. We knew about Castro and Fidel in Cuba. We followed in Mozambique. We followed in Zimbabwe. That time was Mkomo. I don't know where Mugabe come from. But we had that international consciousness. The Trinidad youth, we started off more or less following Castro and so. But then with the rise of the Panthers and the civil movement, uprisings, and so in America, most of the youth start to gravitate towards that. The black struggle, more or less, put it that way. But still, it had the military aspect. The Panthers, they took up the gun, and they were willing to fight. Castro and Che fought. In Trinidad, a lot of youths decide, well, that is the way to go. We had enough National Union of Freedom Fighters. They took to the hills. But somehow, gas money run, 73, and somehow PNM started to regain popularity. He started to start this program with dude. You're getting back pay for dude in Christmas. A lot of fellas buy car and marry over that equivalent of URP, what they have now. And so he get back into the scene there. But he also too, after 70, you want a government job, you want to be in the police or the army, cut your afro, fry your head. They start a militant attack on black consciousness, somehow or the other. And Jack was the only shining light in that respect. But to my experience, no. In that time, we were all youths. We were just following examples of what's going on internationally. I didn't have no ideological position. I know this society was racial, as Jack said. I know it personally. And you know, it's a funny thing. Anytime they hold me in CMT, the first thing they ask me, you black? Meaning, a white? But the strange thing, no white person ever took me for white. I'm telling you, in the army I was trained by the Coldstream Guards from England. I kicked one of them for juggling me. Who is he? What is he? East Indian, Puerto Rican, what is he? They always know who is who. But somehow in Trinidad and, not Jamaica, Jamaica, I'm Mr. Chin. And I accept that. I say, better they call me Mr. Chin than white man. But somehow, what shall I say, we're rich. All right, let me go on. In the army, the majority of soldiers started to identify with the NJAC. That was our thing. Half of them had afros and whatnot. They were following the marches and so. Although there was a movement in the army with Sean LaSalle, Mansa, and myself, we approached Clive Nunes, if he could remember, in 68, somewhere there, when they came back from Cuba. They were at Little Woods. Q was by Little Woods, the bottom of Frederick Street there after Broadway. We approach him, we say he went to Cuba, he must be revolutionary, he must be no things. So we approach him, figuring we in the army, that was before Sean LaSalle came in, could destabilize the army, and the union, maybe they will agitate the people and whatnot to bring down the government. But somehow the thing shift into the more black conscious movement. Then in 73 there, with the oil money run, it seemed like the PNM mantra was, just vote for me. Just vote for you, man. You're going to pay the rent in the planning, $12 a month and all this kind of way. Just vote for us. Yeah, work, we'll give you something. And that mash up the militancy to a great extent of the black people. If you watch Lavantil, Lower Lavantil and Lower Belmont, you'll see the housing schemes there was, I build here, partner, you build there. The rules about that, like they never expect to own a vehicle, a car. You see no signs of tongue and country planning. Pure, the people will, the African people will to develop and have a house in the area was there. They lose that. Now it's government partisan. There are a lot of educated people that came out of Lavantil. Now what? They hang you up on culture. They hang you up on, taking too long? hanging up the turn village council to a culture from a political thing, better village, corrupt the whole scene. There are a lot of stories too about the revolution. A lot of people are heroes, unsung heroes. A lot of ordinary youths gave up their lives, lost their lives. From Faizabad alone, you had a few, well, I don't want to call names as they say. But when we look at our history, I want to talk this because somehow we downplay the militant aspect of our history. Most people talk about Sente, they just talk about the demonstrations and, and what's it not. But if you go back from the 1838, somewhere there, when Daga, who Geddes named himself after, he rebelled against the apprenticeship program. That was the first instance where the army as such stood up for the people. After that you have, that is 1838. You have 1883 calendar riots, you have 1884 wholesale riots. Then you go on to 1903 water riots. They burned down the bread house and stoned the governor for water. Today we still cannot get water.
We have to make room for
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
Another time.
Another time.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And a patient started the ball rolling. But I really must, we have so many different groups and individuals who are here this evening. And I think that really says something about how we feel about where we are in Trinidad and Tobago today. So we don't just have the usual suspects, but we have a lot of the usual suspects. We know who you are. And I don't want to start by thanking, but I really want to say that this intervention, this coming together, this communion, this commemoration, was really very personal for me because of my dad, Winston Mannard, who was in National Joint Action Committee. But I want to recognize, as I was telling a young sister just this week, that we were part of a mass movement and we will continue on, certainly in terms of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, of progressive thought and movement and action. And of course we were caught up in the period of heightened awareness all around the world, in particular Kwame Ture and the Black Panthers, and before them Martin Luther King, but there were movements all over. So I want to state categorically and without compulsion and without apology that this evening is an evening of coming together of people and organizations who in their own way and in their own paths have forged and have tried to be a part of changing the society once you recognize that independence was in fact no better than the piece of paper we had been written on. And the men and women of the period of the post-independence period have a very particular kind of history, and hopefully the conversations, which this is not the one definitive conversation, and it is not strictly a labor movement conversation, it's not strictly an NJAC conversation, it's not strictly a workers and farmers party conversation, it's not strictly a PNM or DLP or TU or CWU or any other name or brand that there is out there. But the fact that you were here this evening, and I'm sorry I came a little late because I left on the late shift to go shower and come back. I'm just so excited to come and see this hall full. So I don't want to single out too many people, but Ozzy Warwick was saying to me and Ozzy to the OWTU, and this hall in which we're going, it has a tremendous amount of symbolism. And I think the motivation for this is not just for us old fogies and the usual suspects to get together, but we should. We should commemorate, regardless of which spaces we occupy now and where we may be. But we have this big gap between our history, our narrative, and what exists in terms of the rest of the society. In an age of information, in an age of instant technology where everybody could be tweeting and messaging and doing all kinds of things in real time, we are so disconnected. So we have a responsibility, regardless of which side of history, politics, party, religion, or any other persuasion to which we subscribe, we just simply cannot erase because it's a little inconvenient and a little uncomfortable. I want to recognize as well Stephen Cavey's, whose contribution in making the first film as a start, not just, it's not the definitive film, but it was a start to us beginning to record our history. And I think one of the things with this gathering would be a call to action for us to commit to that process. Because there's no point in talking about our young people and our institutions and the rest of it when our images, our stories, our debates and so are really not part of the national conversation. And in this room, as a young student in 1970, in this room, I want to pay homage to those who were there, who led a particular charge and a particular direction in the country, and there were many groups. As the history is written, and if you look for it, there were many groups and individuals active in the society. And Jack emerged as not osmosis, but and the people who were foundation members of the National Joint Action Committee, Acacia being one, and we must commend him for his tireless task of chronicling in photography the events and what happened with very little support. So again, when we talk about call to action, when we leave here tonight and we feel good that we vibe with everybody, we know that that's a task that remains incomplete. That documentation is a very, very important part of what we have to do. There are other people here like Clyde Weatherhead, Cecil Paul, Ted Carrasquero, Gregory Russo, Glenn Ramjack, Mrs. Young, the wife of Joe Young. Please recognize her. Uncle Joe was a small, he was a formidable man. His sons are here, Richard and Robert as well, and the friends who were with them. So let's welcome Brother Winston Sweet. I have to do a couple of things this evening, because as I said, it's probably a very, not selfish or self-serving, but I regret that I never took the time to record my dad, given my background in media, etc. I regret it because it's not about singing his praises, but as Sister Aisha told me last night, and we're going to get her on the phone, she's in Texas, he was probably one of the most understated figures, particularly of that era. And I had to say to another brother last week, or brothers at the National Joint Action Committee, some of whom I saw the purple shirt, and I hope that we're going to see more of them later on, that all I know as a child growing up is a man who was committed to struggle. And G's and ages. The stories, the prices, the experiences. So that 1970 was a culmination of a whole lot of things. And different people this evening will share their experiences. And by the way, this is not decorations. This is symbolic of how we used to sit and talk. So anybody who don't need rope to get back up or whatever they can, because of the joints, is quite welcome to come and sit. And that's how we used to do it. So my motivation was, I am heading towards, I've crossed over 60 now. And some of my brothers and a couple of sisters we met 2 years ago as the secondary school students to say, how can we get together and what can we do? I saw Chi when I was coming in, Sekou, Terrence, Abu has gone down to NJAC to come back. Fareed is here, there are others, I'm scanning the room. What can we do that is a civic, driven by what we know, what we represented, and how can we share our experiences and relate to our young people today for these big gaps. So our Gadad has done these many attempts to get together. And then I just said to Kafra and Mariama Kambon, I said, you know what I have in my head? I have in my head that for the 50th anniversary of 1970, or what we celebrate as the 50th anniversary, April 21st, and we forget that there were 2 successive states of emergency, not one, that we must either symbolically, metaphorically, and literally do that march from Caroni to Port of Spain. And when from Port of Spain to Caroni. And it's important because during the evening, and I'm setting a tone here, I know that people have a lot to say. People have a lot to share. And we can do so, some of it on the microphone and move around. But I think part of what I have to do this evening, unless you'll be here until, well, we could keep awake here, we could keep a vigil, because this is the day when they were rousing up everybody and they all those experiences, whether Igoro, Ome, and Apesho were sharing that on Indaba last week or week before. Just those recollections are really very important. They're not anecdotal, they're real experiences. So as I said, my motivation is very selfish, but I also want to resist the temptation, not the temptation, or resist anything for us to have a passive evening. An evening where you just have a few people talking and everybody else is listening. It's an evening of engagement, of sharing, and we have a couple of key messages. And then one of those things that I will have to do at some point in the evening is I have to read something that I got from the daughter of Jack Kelshaw, Katrina Kelshaw, and that will come. But I also have to manage time as well, because some of the older people, well, not older, but yeah, older. Rafiq Shah is watching the news. So I have to call him at 7:30 for him to share a few words. And for those of you who don't know, the Soldiers is a group with very few exceptions in years, have met consistently. I mean, they never talked because, of course, what it is, lawyers speak. There are certain kinds of things you could be charged for up to 25 years and that kind of thing, sedition and all mutiny and all those things, statutory, whatever. So they wouldn't talk. So statute of limitations, whatever, the legal speak. But they meet every single year as a community, and they ground. And they're in Mayaro from Thursday gone to Sunday, and they're going to try and link in with us. Nestor, how are you doing, bro? Old man School, Kelvin School, who really made an effort to come here tonight. And all the people who contributed, something like you were winding up, but no, because this is not one effort. It's not one effort. It's a spark. And by calling people, and these things happen here, we have here tonight, is evidence that we can come together and we can collaborate and we can share around those things that we have in common, regardless of how we may disagree in other spheres. And I think that that is something that we really need to underscore with everybody who's made a contribution, including Kemal Naik Chan, who worked with me to help get this whole organized and sat together. Anyway, so we have some words from Rafiq Shah. We're going to hear a few words from Chan Miraj, and his son, who is, as we speak, involved in some campaign with ex-Caroni workers down in Felicity. And he sent me something on WhatsApp, the wonders of technology. We're going to have a little baby call-in from Aisha Matupe Johnson, who was, I had to say, my compare. I mean, we're talking before we say, geez, the time is going, but remember Aisha, Desmond Granger, Clifton Paul, you know, in terms of Debbie Kilgore. We were almost inseparable, you know, so we have an opportunity to have all of that. So you are not allowed to just sit and be spoken to, but at the same time we have to share the mic and have it go around and stuff. So without further ado, given to punctuate and to sort of set the tone for the evening that is started by a patient. I'm mindful that I have to call Rafiq in 12 minutes time. I'm going to ask Kafra Kambon. He's not hiding. There he is. Or he's trying to. But actually Kafra said that we should be very careful that we don't jailbirds. We have to be very careful that there are a lot of jailbirds in our midst and we don't want to be associated with them at this stage of his life. You can sit, you can stand, you can do whatever you want, Kafra.
Thank you. I have to, because that's like, let me just welcome all who are here. There are many faces I know, some I don't. Some I know the faces, I don't remember the names. You know, these things happen once you cross 45. These things tend to happen. And I'm over 45 now. But this is a very significant day. I have to thank Josanne and the other young people who, well, in the case of Josanne is one of those who broke the law and paid the price of, I think the police beat her because they're locked up, you know. So that people like myself, I mean, we try to guide the young people, but you know, they go to do these things and get into problems. But I think this old man here as well, he was put on Nelson Island and all of that. And I used to read about them in the newspapers. And I used to visit them. I never visited them, but I visited people like Makana that also at the Royal Jail. You know, as you know, I used to live very close to very close to so it was easy for me to visit. But this is a very significant day because it's part of a very significant movement, which was one of the most transformative moments in the history of Trinidad and Tobago in the 20th century. Because it dealt comprehensively with the ills that were affecting the society and tried to chart a future for a different kind of society. And the movement is something that started spontaneously in many areas, because all through the 60s, you were beginning to build a momentum. Things like the Cuban Revolution I heard mentioned, the Vietnam War, you know, things from outside. You had movements of students in the United States, in Europe, and all of that. Then you had the civil rights movement in the United States, which eventually became known more as the Black Power movement, after Kwame Ture shouted Black Power at one of the marches that was organized by Martin Luther King. And from then on, there was a lot of controversy around the idea of Black Power. But it had a very strong motivating force on the blocks in Trinidad and Tobago. Those of you who would know Quarry Street in the early days, just as you enter Quarry Street, there used to be a sign on a wall. And it remained there for decades afterwards. And it said, without equal rights, black is dangerous. And that was very thematic of the movement. And the demonstrations that started to take place, the actions that started to take place made it quite clear that without equal rights, black can in fact be dangerous. And it came close to overthrowing a government. So the National Joint Action Committee is the organization which brought a lot of forces in the society together after its formation on February 26, 1969. When NJAC was formed, I would not remember all the organizations that were present. But you see this hall that we stand in now, which is an OWTU hall. The person who used to take care, the godfather of NJAC, used to be the caretaker for this hall. He was an older guy. His name was James Lynch. I don't know if any member of his family is here today. Okay, good. Right. So James Lynch, as well as George Weeks, Clyde Nunes from the Transport and Industrial Workers Union. There were other people from the OWTU. I don't think Leonard was there that night. He was that time education officer or something of the OWTU. But there was one other person from the OWTU whose name I'd like to remember, because he turned out to be a traitor to George later on. No, it wasn't Lagos. It wasn't Beckham's either. I mean, they turned out to be traitors too. But it wasn't them. I don't remember the guy. The guy was a sort of big, a stocky guy. Spoke a lot. But you had OWTU represented Transport and Industrial Workers Union. And a name that a lot of people may not know, Francis Belleau. There was a union next door to TU. It was called the National Union of Food, Beverages, and Allied Workers. And Francis Belleau, he was a real militant as well. So you had unions, you had people from grassroots organizations who were present as well. And it happened quite by chance that NJAC was born on the night when the students stopped the Governor General of Canada from entering the campus. Because it was planned for that. But that, I suppose, set the right moment for it. Because the reactions to that, in fact, helped to propel the National Joint Action Committee, but it included students, and after Michigan was blocked, a decision was taken. The same night NJAC was being born, a couple of the officials on campus were meeting and making the erroneous decision to expel 3 students from the university at that time. One was Dennis Granger, who became a final dagger. The other was Augustus Ramvikerson, and there was a guy called Dave Darbo as well. They wanted to expel 3 of them from the university. But when we met, not even knowing that expulsion was being planned at the time, we decided on a series of public meetings that would take place. It was taking place on behalf of the students who were in Canada and who were part of that St. George Williams University incident. That was one of the items on the agenda that was going to happen. We were also going to be talking, see that Michigan had been blocked. We put the question of imperialism on the agenda, in particular Canadian imperialism. Because people, United States, Britain is all clear, but Canada has a very nice peace. But we had the research to show, you had a lot of Canadian banks here, and we had the research to show how Canada was sucking money out of this country, they were part of the whole imperialist thing. But with that agenda, things started to build, other things happened, like you had a bus strike. I'm sorry that Clyde Nunes, I don't think he's in the country right now. Right, out of the country now. But you had a bus strike of 69, which was significant. It broke the law at the time. Nobody said it didn't break the law. Everybody admitted it. Because you had a clear law that said you could not strike. But the bus workers went on strike. And I must say something to George Weeks, one of the most courageous men I have had the privilege to work with. Because when the government decided it was time to put an end to this illegal strike. This was all in 1969. This was May 1969. When they decided to put an end to it, a number of us met, and the headquarters of the Transport and Industrial Workers Union was on Broadway upstairs, one of those buildings. Upstairs where Trespray was, Siloy Trespray. And when we met, we took a decision. We had to block the buses. Otherwise, the strike would be broken. And the morning that we went to block the buses, and the scene was something else because you had those of us who came to block the buses, a mass of workers, lots of police vans, and police really seriously armed that morning. And when the first bus started to move, we all went and confronted the bus. And the decision was, when the police come to arrest you, you just go with them. Because you knew you were going to get locked up that morning. So, went and blocking the buses. But then Joe Young and George Reeves, because some people they decided that once the police grabbed them, some of them so glad to put a baton on them. So they grabbed them and put a baton on them and threw them in the van and all of that. Joe Young and George Reeves were the last ones left blocking the buses. And then they got Joe and George Reeves alone remained in front of this piece of metal, pushing. I will never forget that image of George holding on to that bus as though he was Samson to really stop the bus. And the police inspector is instructing the driver, drive, drive, drive. And George is holding on the driver, just keeps jerking the bus forward, and George wouldn't let go at all. And then they come and they start the beating. When I said the lyrics, they put on George. They didn't know George was so strong. Started to put back on him, and George wouldn't let go of the bus at all. Until they had to drag him away. But that's when I realized the metal that that man called George Reeves was made of. And I said that James was one of the people at that first meeting. I spoke about him as being the godfather of NJAC because he's the one who came up with the name. It was Joint National Action Committee. And then later it was National Joint Action Committee. But here it is, you had a combination. This was seen on February 26, 1970. Because that was essentially students from the University of the West Indies, that time we still had the train running, decided to come into policy in order to show a protest because the students were going on trial in Canada at that time. So that was the students' movement. But because the university at the time, that student bill that was led by Daga, who was getting his grade at the time, had integrated itself so much with the communities, because when Daga became president of the Guild, one of the things that he did, he said students should give back to the community. And as a result, we used to go into Lalonton and surrounding areas and hold free lessons classes for people in that area. That was one outreach of community. We also did a lot of interaction with the trade unions at the time. In fact, there was a group of workers from the block who were dissatisfied with the union, and they used to come to us and we used to work with them. So when the students went to march, I remember Clive Union and a few other people and a few people from other organizations came. It was a little bigger than a student march. It was a small march, about 200 people all told or so. And we really went to go to the Canadian embassy. But as fate would have it, the Canadian embassy expected we would come there to the lockup. But we said there must be something else Canadian around. And of course, there were plenty of Canadian bands. So we went to the Canadian band. And the police came and they were trying to remove people. And a patient told a story of some incident that took place there. But I ended up on the ground as a result of the incident. And when I ended up on the ground and I caught myself, I tried to get up. But some brothers came and they held me down. Don't move, don't move, don't move, don't move. Play unconscious. And then they lifted me. And I am now playing the band. I am. And they lift me out of the band. And of course, people going crazy now. What the police did, what the police do can on. You know, but as I hit the pavement, I was good again. But everybody vexed now, and you had a store right opposite Montano. Had a store. That was the brother of the what called Home Affairs Minister, which was like National Security Minister now. I don't know if he had cases in the United States and all that. That was the equivalent post at the time. And we went over to the store. And this was the beginning of something else that became a pattern of 1970. Because when we went into the store, of course everybody was nervous. So we tell people, listen, pass by but don't pick up anything. So the demonstration just walked through the Montano store, came back out, and it seemed like a good idea. But as they are going along Independence Square, somebody said to the cathedral, and the demonstration went into the cathedral, and all the Nancy stories came out of that. But the critical moment there, on this February 26th, and this is the last story I will do. But the critical moment for that February 26th is that when the news hit, this was a small demonstration. When the news hit that the demonstration had gone into the Catholic Church, and that came out on the news. This is like a story of Christ and the fishes and the loaves and so on. I forget the numbers now because a patient tells me I shouldn't read the Bible that much. But so I kind of forget the numbers. But when we went in there, and the news hit, 200, maybe by then another 50 had joined. I said 250 went in, and over 5,000. Because as news hit, I don't know what the Catholic Church did to people train out of the but somehow, as people hear a demonstration going to the Catholic Church, and I gave them what we were waiting for, and they came in vast numbers. So by the time we left there now, and people understand that the demonstration didn't stick to the streets. They had a way of winding its way through the stores. Well, workers were so happy because they got a holiday. So some went home and some came and joined the demonstration at the time. So I'm just giving you a sense of the environment that existed at the time. And that was the beginning. Patients said they came and they locked up a couple of people, but that was the beginning of a movement that really stunned the country. Because I remember after the first massive march, after the court case came up, and so the first massive march, the headline of Ken Gordon said, Black Power stuns the city. Right? Some people say that Ken Gordon is the one who christened the Black Power movement. But I tell you the truth, from the time I got involved in 1969, I was part of the Black Power movement. That's what I really am. I don't do it any different. So I don't know. From my perspective, Ken Gordon had just said what existed. But that was a very significant beginning. And others who got active on April 21st, like Rafik Shah, is waiting to come on now. And I think I want to give them a chance to bring on Rafik Shah. And why Joseph is okay, so why Joseph is doing that, let me say my own experience on this day 48 years ago. I lived on Gordon Street. People whose memories are lapsing think the police used to come out of the prisons. The prisons, they were put prisoners. The police come out of the police station. So just for clarity. Just for clarity. But they came for me pretty early in the morning. But we had a lot of police stories there. So my house did have a back door with a step to go down. And the loud knocking was on the front door. But I say, you know something? I bet anything. They cover in the back as well. So I just got things that I felt I would need. For the trip, I don't know where they were going to take me, but somehow I felt that they didn't come to me up with this call. And they might have wanted me to go somewhere with them, so I got the things I felt I would need for that journey at the time. And I told some of the brothers who were in the house with me, because my house was like a mini headquarters. My mother was abroad. I was the one in charge of living in charge of the space at the time. So it was like a mini headquarters. So I whispered to the brothers, I said, listen, call Winston, Leonard, and Dan. They had just gone down that weekend before. This was a Monday morning. And they had gone, sugar workers had come to our headquarters. They said they just had a confrontation with bandits. It must have come about Thursday or Friday to the headquarters. And they told us what had happened. And knowing we had challenged bandits, they decided they wanted us to come and help them in the situation. So Dagger and Leonard went down and they spent the next 2 days. And the entire sugar industry was going to come on just 2 days of mobilization, and the entire sugar industry was going to come out on April 21st. They were due to come out. Plus you had master workers on strike, like unions, and myself, when we were kind of operating that strike. In fact, when the union came, they ran the union leaders, they said, these are our representatives here. So you had master workers. So the plan was sugar workers coming into town. When they come off the southern main road, they would meet the Wassa workers. And surprise or surprise, there was a company. They want to come on strike. So we said, okay, April 21st is the strike. So they were preparing to come out. Nigerians and New Young and so had bus workers ready to come out on strike. And many other small industries and places, workers were already on strike. So you could imagine what was going to happen in Forestry on April 21st. What happened was quite different, because even before the government declared a state of emergency, because they picked me up about 4 o'clock in the morning, so I still have some money to get the next taxi back, because I was locked up long before the state of emergency was declared. It was so undeclared that when the police took me down the street, I was the first to reach the police. The postcard, what's happening? They are the ones who told the Coast Guard.
We'll be joined by Rafiq Shah, who is on the line. And as I mentioned earlier, Rafiq and his cohorts, they would normally get together every year. I don't think Rex LaSalle is here this year. And Rafiq pointed out to me that about 15 or 16 of the soldiers that group have already passed on. So, Raf,
if you can hear me, you have a packed house. A lot of the usual suspects, I can tell you, are here. And a very diverse group of people as well. As I said earlier, a lot of the trade unions are here. Suniti Maraj Best from the Lloyd Best Institute and Royal Gibbons came in a short while ago. Igor May just came in from NJAC. They're meeting down. Winston Sweet is here. A lot of the younger Turks from the unions. You know, they're all men and women now, and a whole lot of other people. So Ralph, if you're on the line, it's all yours.
First of all, good evening, comrades, and greetings all. I want to say a special greeting to those who were the secondary school students of 1970, often forgotten. But a special greeting to you all. Of course, April 21st 21st was a remarkable day in the history of the country, and it remains indelibly etched in the memories and minds of those of us who were involved at whatever level, whether it was NJAC at the street level, the people's demonstrations marching through the streets of Port-of-Spain, in the city, in the countryside, wherever, or eventually on April 21st, the soldiers at the regiment base in Tetron, all 300 or so, who rebelled with a mood of defiance and really turned around what the government of the day, to its shame, sought to bring an end to the movement for black consciousness, movement, anti-colonialism, and many different ideological strands that were part of that mass movement, sought to put an end to it, and only fueled the fire by people who were going to defy the state of emergency, none more so than the soldiers at Tetron, who decided that we weren't going to allow the government of the day to use our arms and ammunition against the masses of the people. I should say on behalf of the soldiers who still carry on every year a camp there right now at Camp Mearu for maybe the 30th camp in 48 years now, I think, since 1970. 48 years, yes. Maybe 30 camps we have had annual camps, and before that we used to have get-togethers. They are alerted to it, but unfortunately cannot participate because we weren't able to hook up with them on this session here. I would just like to, in addition to thanking those of you who were students, and you know, the thing about it is that even among some of the soldiers, they forgot the role that the students played. And I remember very well the day after we were sentenced to jail by the court-martial, which would have been in March, I think, of 1971. I can't remember the exact date. In open defiance against the law that prohibited marching, public demonstrations, Josanne and a number of students led a march to Whitehall, I believe, and a photograph of them appeared 2 days after we were sentenced. At that point, I personally had received the heaviest sentence, 20 years. In fact, when Colonel Danjuma, because I think I did not that I got it because I was seen as the premier leader as such, but because of my defiance in the courtroom and that court-martial address that I delivered over 2 days in January of that year. When he said, as he had sentenced me, Lieutenant Shah, the court sentenced you to 20 years, which caused quite a cussing coming from the public gallery, so much so that he had to hustle and read out the other sentences. While we were courageous and we were men of steel, we considered ourselves, it was not easy to think about 20 years in prison. Therefore, when 2 days later we saw in the newspaper students 14 years, 15 years old, some younger, marching and openly calling for to free the people's soldiers, that gave us some great courage. Rex LaSalle and I were in fact in solitary confinement in the notorious E division of Royal Jail as it then was. The only two prisoners in a block with 17 cells and one cell that had a toilet and bath and so on. So that gave us tremendous courage and a fillip to continue the struggle within prison and from behind the walls, which we successfully did. I should also say that the soldiers, there were a few who broke down, as can be expected. Prison is not an easy thing. We spent a total of 27 months between May the 1st, 1970, when we surrendered in a manner of speaking. The three officers, myself, Rex LaSalle, and Michael Bazzi. 27 months in prison was quite an ordeal, but we were strong. We were defiant always. We had strong convictions as to what we stood for, and that really took us through prison. Nevertheless, prison is very, very tough on anyone who is inside there, and those of us, I'm sure I heard Cambon's voice earlier, maybe Clive is there, and others who were imprisoned will know and testify to what it is and what it means being in prison. What it means being in prison and hearing a sentence of 20 years or 15 years in the case of Rex LaSalle, 10 years for Mike Bazzi, and sentences ranging from 10 to 2 years for other soldiers, and more were to follow. That was only from the first court-martial. All told, about 30 soldiers were out of 100 or so who had been arrested in the aftermath of the mutiny. They were sentenced to terms of imprisonment. Just to explain, because some people often forget this, that we weren't freed because of the good heart of Dr. Williams or Carl Hudson Phillips or the PNM government. We won our matter. Rex LaSalle and I, in studying in the prison, the court, the charges against us, which range from mutinies on the military side, which the government chose to pursue, not the treason charge, because they really couldn't prove treason. That was the holding charge to keep us in jail. If they had only charged us with mutiny, we would have insisted on being held in a military prison, of which there was none in the country, so they would have been in a pickle. We discovered, studying the law, and because in prison you really have little else to do but to read, and in our case exercise a lot and stay very fit, and so we discovered a clause in the law that where the commanding officer, if he condoned your infringement of any law, any military law, then you can be, that is tantamount. Condonation can set aside or make you, render you not having to stand trial In this case, they threw out the condemnation plea, the court-martial, but the appeal court upheld it. And that is how 27 months later, we led our men to freedom out of prison. The nexus between the soldiers and the mass movement on the outside, led by NJAC, was not anything that was open, meaning that we were not part of that movement because we could not be part of the movement as soldiers. Although there was considerable empathy and support from the ranks, from mostly the other ranks, of course, and some of the officers across the board for the Black Power movement, as it was called, and revolution at the broader level. We could not openly show that. However, when soldiers passed demonstrations in the transport trucks and so on, and they passed demonstrations being carried on, the soldiers would pump their fists in the air and shout, "Power to the people," which was quite a thing coming from the soldiers, the military, that was not supposed to happen according to military law, but the soldiers did not mind that, or they didn't care for that. In fact, I remember one soldier who he indeed died a couple of months ago in Canada. He was never arrested, or not arrested and charged, at Camp Ogden on Long Circular Road. Put on a tall football socks, a blue sock, one side on his right hand, a beret on his head, and came out on the landing overlooking the guard room and the company offices, pumped his fist in the air and said, "The only solution is armed revolution." And the sergeant major nearby bawled, "Lock him up." And he was locked up and charged within the army, some minor charge, and probably got a couple of days detention or something like that. So that while there was no structural link between NJAC or the mass movement and the soldiers, that cross-fertilization was always there because of the revolutionary fervor that had permeated the ranks from the private soldiers to some of the officers, the junior officers. And when April 21st came, it did not take much for us, Rex LaSalle and I, on the one hand, and the soldiers who were very conscious, because prior to April 21st, books like Soul and Ice, Fidel Castro's History Will Absolve Me, which influenced my court-martial address a lot. In fact, there's quite a bit of fudging, I would say, from memory, because we didn't have the book. We weren't allowed books like that in prison. But my court-martial address was patterned and influenced heavily by Fidel's History Will Absolve Me after the Moncada uprising in 1953, I think, when he was put on trial. So there was that connection there with that was invisible in many ways, but it was there, and it played out on April the 21st. And as I said earlier, it remains etched in the memories of all of us who were involved. You can never forget it. Just one final thing I wanted to say And that is, we all have stories, those of us who were involved, whether you were secondary school students, age 12, age 14. Incidentally, Josanne, my youngest brother, who was at the Couva Government Secondary, in fact, my two brothers were attended the Couva Government Secondary, told me while we were in prison, you came down to have a march supporting the soldiers in Couva, and that there were about 4 or 5 people who marched through Couva. He said, you fellas could march, and easily when you have hundreds or thousands of people, you could march, but when you have 3 and 4, try marching down Couva Main Road. And apparently that march came off. That was the only involvement of students from Couva Government Secondary. But as I was saying, we all have stories. We may think them unimportant. In fact, when I talk to almost 100% of the soldiers, including the officers who currently serve in the regiment or the Coast Guard, know nothing about what happened in 1970, the mutiny, the role of the Coast Guard, and so on. Nothing about that. And 90% of young people today also know little or nothing of 1970. And we tend to blame them because they don't pursue their history. But where do they get it from? Where can they access information on what happened in 1970? There's very little to go by. I myself have been struggling with a book that is 85% finished and was 85% finished 2 years ago. I am again making another effort in spite of the effects of Parkinson's. I'm trying to complete it, hopefully this year. But whatever experiences we had, I think we should write them down. We should record them. You have modern technology now. You can do your own video recording. And those pieces, hopefully, although I know all of you will be probably 60 and over now, and for people like me, I crossed my 72nd year in March. Some a little older, 74, 75, thereabout, may still be able to finish off or write our experiences. Somebody somewhere, maybe after we will have passed on, will put those things together and record such an important part of the history of this country so that it's not lost. I implore you to do that, because I myself was lazy. That's the only thing I can write it off to, being very lazy and not finishing before I had Parkinson's, not finishing that book that I committed myself to writing. And it was important to do it because of the nature of the mutiny taking place in the secluded Tetron barracks, most of it anyway, because people often forget that on the second day, Tuesday was April the 21st, when the state of emergency was declared and when the mutiny took place at Tetron. At Tetron, one of the soldiers took over the telephone exchange, as it then was, or after we captured the telephone exchange, called Camp Ogden and said, we have taken over at Tetron. What are you fellas doing at Ogden? The next day, Camp Ogden was burned to the ground. People often forget that. And that was quite independent of what was happening at Tetron. It was just supportive of the mass movement and the mutiny. So these stories, I think it is important to record them for posterity and for the purposes of the history of the revolution in Trinidad and Tobago, the revolution that dates back to the turn of the century with the Trinidad Working Men's Association the Butler movement of 37 and so on, right through the landmark periods, 1970 being one, and April the 21st, 1970 being a special day in relation to the history of Trinidad and Tobago and the revolutionary history of Trinidad and Tobago. So I again implore you to write and record in whatever way your little stories, and they will come together and hopefully be of benefit to the people who follow us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raf. Thank you very much.
I certainly will.
Okay, thank you very much, Raf. And you know that just Clive Weatherhead, who is here with us, Clive actually handed me something which might be useful. I don't know if he had any extra copies, but he's actually done a compilation of a number of books and articles and so that have been written on this particular period. And it's really very interesting. And on the thing of literature, it's a good time for me to say that For Bread, Justice and Freedom, which was written by, it's a political biography of George Weeks by Kafra Cambon, and the Roaring 70s. If you've never seen Zeno Constant's production of the Roaring 70s, the book is here. And I think there's one other publication as well. So there's some books here on sale for, they're very small quantities, maybe not see a lot of them in the bookshops, so you could come and make some inquiries. So we know people are going to get tired, but there are a lot of stories, and it's very hard to ask people to cut short. As I said, you know, for those of you, if you don't need rope to get up, we have some seating here on the ground. No, because I know everybody, a lot of us here are over 60, so we might need some rope to get up. I don't want us to get tired, but there's some stories. We're commemorating 1970, all the parts that led to it, and there are two former political detainees, or as Kafra would say, two jailbirds with us, Winston Sweet and Ayagoro Ume, who were both on Nelson Island. And I'd ask, maybe I'll start with you, Winston, to share some of your thoughts and your experiences. We have a chair, so there's no need to stand. We could come across here, Opesho, and can give him that mic. Yeah, just there. So he does. Yeah, you could just take the mic off there. If you want to, do you want to hold the mic, Winston, or just leave it on the stand?
Good night, brothers and sisters. I will be 78 in about a month's time. I was one of the older of the detainees. In fact, I was 30 years old in 1970. I will not narrate any experiences. In fact, I would leave that for my colleagues who are better able to recall and who believe in that aspect. When I was asked to come here, I thought for a moment, every year on the 21st, we can break up the responses from the media in different ways. For instance, tonight we have been hearing the term celebrate possibly more often than any other description of the task facing us. to celebrate. To celebrate is public, and this is why we are here in a public gathering. One could celebrate by oneself. You know, fellas say, well, boy, I will get a bottle of rum and take a drink by myself. But I don't suppose that these events call for that. Celebrate. The next thing is to remember. This is a term that I have not been hearing as much, or almost as much, but not as much. We seem to want to remember, to contemplate in private, as opposed to celebrate in public. The words that are missing are to analyze. And to analyze suggests to be critical. The next word I hope that we will find some time for, even if not tonight, is to evaluate. That is to assess or to measure. And while there can be a number of other subheadings like that, I will stop at the fifth one. To put in perspective. In a sense, all the celebration, the remembering, the analyzing, the evaluating must be put in perspective. To put in perspective suggests to plan, and this is about the future. So often, we who were in the forefront or even in the tail of 1970 wish to dwell more on the past, and we are almost silent on the future. In fact, I must apologize and even ask forgiveness here, because my first reaction was not to come. Over the years, and I told you I'll be 78 just now, I have been present at a lot of celebrations, rap sessions and celebrations, a lot of remembering, a lot of analyzing, well, I shouldn't say a lot, some. And I go a little further. To celebrate, to resurrect with joy, to identify the achievements, and to look back. That is not from a dictionary. That's my own description, lest someone accuse me of plagiarism, as my colleague Rex was talking about. There's that danger. To remember with stages of development, the path, the ups and downs. To analyze, to dig up, to scrutinize the path taken, the errors, the strategies, the tactics, and the what-ifs. To evaluate is to measure, to weigh, to compare. What we have seen, I'm glad that we have an array of some documentation. I do not comment on what is here. They may be written not by scholars, and therefore they may be more authentic. But we have a surfeit of formal documentation. My friend Selwyn Ryan rushed to print even before some of us were out of the prison. There was an American historian who wrote a book before the first state of emergency. The academic historians have been poor. I cannot say I can rejoice in their tomes. Neither can I say I am even satisfied with the many journalistic compilation masquerading as objective analysis. I looked in today's papers carefully, and I looked for both the formal historians and the journalists. Well, possibly not much came out today. I only saw one article from neither of them. So that might come tomorrow. Then there are the activists, some who are of my generation and have forgotten what happened or are caught in a romantic flux of events and are caught up in a one-dimensional flow in the history events. I am in that group of nostalgia. In what then are our problems rooted today? The failure to have analyzed the events of 1970 revolution, but above all, a failure to document and to develop a strategic path forward. Hopefully, we will seek, when next we meet, that is next year, to commit a less ambitious agenda. But we must more focus on one, that is clarity. It is never too late. A new generation must take up the challenge because the challenges are by and large still there. And they loom bold. Why do I say so? Each year, there are the cynics who ask, what did Black Power achieve? Every year you have that. Criticism. I was telling my wife about one particular gentleman who takes fun at making mockery at us. What have you achieved? I'm tempted sometimes to take a sheet of paper and list. Because every now and again I meet people who say, boy, you know, it's 1970, why my daughter is working in the bank, or things like that. But there's an awakening in Trinidad that has taken place, not possibly at our satisfactory level, but there are a number of other things that we could list, and possibly that is one of the tasks that we should look at before we die. What did we achieve, or what did 1970 achieve? Because we need to do that. Then we have to wrestle with the rise in murder, the death of a generation of Black African youth consumed in killing themselves. There is, of course, the increase of the African youth drop out from school, and we wonder how much is because of 1970. In other words, you all adults can look at the data, that the majority of dropouts from high school are African youths, male. Is this what we wanted in 1970? Why? We have to take blame for it. I can go on. I mean, we look at the university population. That is a sad story. to compare university registration in pre-1970 of the African population as opposed to the present population in university of the African population. You all should think about that. And Jack, ask that question. Why is it that when you walk through Costard or UWI, that the majority of students are not Africans, not even average, not even 50%? Why? I can go on and on in identifying the symptoms of the black community failure. I have made my point. I would like, nevertheless, to briefly highlight what I call the streams of 1970. In other words, I will not spend any more time here tonight talking about the negative parts, what we did not achieve. Hopefully other speakers after will deal with that. What I would like to do in the remaining time is to list briefly, because many people do not recall or understand what I tend to call the streams that met, the confluence in April 21st. In fact, there are what I call three, you could break this list down into you have to bear with me a little bit. What I call the ancient roots, ancient. Because some of us believed that 1970 sprung up suddenly like a fine garden. And not to understand that 1970 was a historical development. They are what I call ancient roots that extend from 1492 with the advent of slavery right up to 1895 with the end of slavery in Cuba and Brazil. But slavery was to go on up until 1834 in Trinidad. A lot has been written on our aspect about that. But over the last 10 or 15 years, we Trinidadians, particularly those who did not grow up in the south of the island, knew very little bit about what today we call the Americans. A whole stream of Africans, freed African slaves. They were freed because they fought with the British, and the British lost a war in America. And those who fought with the British, part of their reward was to settle them in the Caribbean. And most of them end up to the northeast, 2 miles to the northeast of Princeton, Savannah Grande. And therefore, from 1816 to 1819, when they brought these people here, there was a community of freed Africans from 1819 in the back of Princeton, while they had slavery in Princeton up to 1834. In fact, when I tried to track down some of this on the UWI campus after 1970, I found absolute ignorance of that. What this meant is that there was a whole freed African community of Africanism. The companies, an island of freedom in a sea of Caribbean slavery. We have to understand that, and in a sense, that is not on our curriculum anywhere. We haven't internalized it, because those people in Fifth Company still struggling, in some cases for their identity, for their land, etc. Black power. Then what I call the modern roots, the era, from 1834 to 1945. And the central issue I extract, there are many issues, but the central issue I wish to extract tonight is the fact that in 1845, there were sugar estates and other estates developed even to the south of the island. And the question I pose is, who cut down the forests prior to 1834? Who cut down the forests? Who set out the estates that Sir Norman Lamont bought in South Trinidad? Who cut down the estates in Buenitento? Last week there had some killings. Or the Lothians Road estates, not too far from it, the Anglican churches. Who cut down those forests? Who set out those forests? The other period is from 1956 to 1970. It is not in isolation. It is not by outside. I am leaving the period just prior 69 to 70 for other people. But what I want to speak, just list for the historians and for the analysts, is that black power grew out of a series of experiences. We could list many of them. Padmore, the non-aligned movement subsequent to Marcus Garvey, and all these different things. We have to remember that. Because that was the ground that we found that nourished black power movement. In 1969, people run to you and bring a book. I remember a fellow coming up to me and handing me a book called J. Rogers, Sex and Race. I can't find a copy of it up now in a library. But it is the first book I saw that told me that the Portuguese monarchy was set up in Brazil for a certain time. In other words, I'm saying we have to understand all these historical streams. We have to understand the role of the Baptists, the Shango, right? Orisha, all of this that existed in different pockets in Trinidad. So that 1968-69 was able to be enriched with all these experiences. I would not go on any further except to say, I hope that what we do after tonight, because people may have come here with plans, is that we begin the analysis, not so much of what we did wrong in 1970 or the few years immediately after, but what did we do after 1975, 85? What did we do? What has been done up to now? Because the society now in 2018 is in crisis. It is in crisis. And while we celebrate and we remember and we rejoice and we do all these things, the society in which we are is in crisis. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Put that to the side.
Thank you very much, Winston. I know that some of it, I mean, we could be here for hours and we could have conferences, and we'd like to thank Winston for raising issues and approaches and everything that he posits that we need to contemplate as we talk about remembrance, commemoration, reflection, analysis, etc. I would like to ask, because I know people are going to get tired sitting, and we also going to have, you know, the drumming and the poetry and some other commemorations and memories to be shared. I'd like to recognize Sister Aintu Springer. In fact, young Muwakil Mohammed, may it still turn up, because he had agreed to read a piece from someone who is called one of the revolutionary poets at the time, Abdul Malik, who is in London. His sister Attila is here. His daughter, sorry, Attila is here. He was quite a powerhouse, and of course, Lasana Kwesi and there are others. And there are some contributions to come from other people, Clyde Weatherhead, the Joe Young's sons, Richard and Robert, and Ayagoro Ume, and others there. So, but let me ask Sister Aintu Springer, because one of the things, hi Charmaine, one of the things we talk about the politics and the social movement, and so was this cultural renaissance of the period, the confidence that emerged, the music of Andre Tanka and Lancelot Lane and Ella Andel and Sundar Popo, and we go on and on. So while we wait for Muwakil, you want to sit there, Aintu, or you want to come to the front? Because I think you should come to the front. Yeah?
She helping you to walk or go.
Well, while we wait for the young poet, the old poet from the 70s is here. And just a few words to say that the culture, the poetry, the music, the dance were critical elements of the movement. I saw a picture of Rosetta and Gaddafi. It was in their iconic house that we ran the Black Traditions in Art, at which I was the Makome. And to share one little story, Joe Young's sons are here. I remember when I first joined the movement, the leadership at the time was not really convinced that art and culture had much relevance as a transformative tool. And we put on something called street theater on where is now the Brian Lara Promenade. And Joe Young opened his car and used his car battery to give us the power for the mics and all of that. Asta Johnson had just come back, Andre Tanka, Cheryl Byron, we saw a picture of her there just now, Dominic Alipasad, a very fine actor, Anialdo Rodriguez, members of my own, people like Noel Blandon, Patrick Cambridge. And we closed the thing with a piece by Eric Roach on Butler. And we mimed the burning of the policeman, Charlie King. We threw flambeau and thing. And it was the day before Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Eve night, 12 policemen with filthy boots stormed my mother's little apartment in Laventille. She had a nervous breakdown because they threatened to kill her girl child, me. I remember his name gone out of my head now. He had his SLR and he told my mother, I have a bullet for her. So right after that, I remember having a discussion with the chief servant And there was a lot of interest in how we could mobilize this thing, It is my belief and my life's work that the power to transform lies in our art and culture, in our poetry, in our music, in our theater. And we still are not using it. We still are not convinced. But that is my life's work. I see my brother Hollis here, also his life's work. And we believe that. So I want to ask my brother Blocker, and I want to thank him for being the voice of the 70 in the drum. And I want us to sing. There was a chant we used to sing on the road when we on those long, long marches. All the way from Africa land. Everybody. I'm not a singer, so people sing. What kind of half-dead clapping was that? Come, Blocker, give them the rhythm. And all you're clapping out of time. All the way from Africa land we come in. What kind of half-dead Africans is this? From Africa land we come in to carry them home. We come in all the way from Africa. We come in all the way from Africa land. We come in, we come in to carry all the way from. We come in to carry them.
That's our appreciation. We had really envisaged that we would not have much speechifying, that we would break down into sessions where people could carry on the same discussions in little groups instead of, somebody just throwing it out at us. But a lot of us used to be in NJAC. And that explains a lot more that some of you might appreciate. I just wanted to make a small interjection. Part of what was raised earlier, particularly when Vincent was talking about the lack of documentation and so on, some of us have tried, right? And what we have done for tonight is to line up a whole set of images that would, in some ways, speak to you more than some of the speeches will. And if you look on the screen behind me, you have a collection there of 175 images that is on a loop that you're going to keep running around and around. They form the nucleus of a book that I have been working on for the last couple of years, and I had to be careful with this. When I was working on the exhibition, and it took me about 4 years, I go around them, what's behind me, oh God, you on this exhibition again? It came off. This book is going to be out before the end of this year. All right? It started off just where I just wanted, it was supposed to be just a book of the photographs of the 1970s. Not 1970 as such, but the decade of the 70s. Because in 1970, when the emergency was declared, I had just passed on a package with 8 rolls of negatives of the demonstrations and so on. And I passed them on to the brother who was going to be responsible for bringing out a newsletter the following week. When the emergency, I'm speaking very slowly because I don't normally get to the end of this. It's very emotional for me. By the time we saw each other down Nelson Island, he explained that the negatives were safe because he had passed them on to Alfie for safekeeping. We later found out that Alfie passed them on to one of his partners for safekeeping because Alfie thought the police was coming for him. The brother didn't care who it was, he put it away. We have never seen them since. It's about 300 images of a number of marches, which the equivalent in today's digital photography is about 3,000 images. I managed, fortunately, the Basil Davis funeral and the march to Arima escaped that transfer. But we realized afterwards that it's not an album we were selling, and that a lot of the images wouldn't mean anything to people unless they were put in some kind of context. So we started doing some captions, and then we realized that the audience is likely to be people who don't know nothing about 70. So when you say this was Basil Davis' funeral, they want to know, who is Basil Davis? Who killed him? Why? So we had to start to expand on it. Yesterday, Shabaka Kambon was cautioning me that it shouldn't have too much writing. You know, we should let the pictures talk. So we kind of in between those two phases right now, but the book is going to be out before the end of 2018 AD. I've been making some promises before, you see, so I just clarifying that. But the final thing was that I have been convinced that it is better that we do something that is well done and properly authenticated than try to meet somebody else's timeline. So we are making sure that it fits into a groove, because very little authentic has been written about the 1970s. Right? So we are going to make sure that by the end of the year, I intend to get it into every secondary school all in the country, and let us make sure that it gets to the people where it's going to make a difference. So that, but in the meantime, you can go around, and if you need any explanation about any of the images, you just let us know. Well, let me know, because some of the other people, hey, we have some nice picture of Cambon when he had here. We have some nice pictures of Valentino before he had a RAS. You know, we have some good images. We have Ayagoro doing naming ceremonies. We have some lovely pictures of his wife, who is no longer with us. In fact, both of them, yes. And you know, we have images of the students' marches, right? So. Right, I was just reminded that we have Sister Olabisi Kuboni. That is Dr. Olabisi Kuboni, who is doing, and for the records, the only woman, as far as I know, that was appointed to the Central Committee of the National Joint Action Committee. Huh? I was asked to offer you a space to share a few words with the audience. No, share like the rest of you. Who I have much to say and is always say it. She has a lot to say, so you know. Ola. Oh God, all your, who is that?
Yes.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Brother Apesho. Let me say I was late, and I think I need to explain, because one ought not to just walk in like this. The community in which I live, it might sound very ordinary, but it was very important to us. Where I live, one person is moving out of the community, and we had a short reception to say goodbye to this individual, and she was very important to us, and I couldn't miss it, right? So that's why I came in late. Yes. Yeah. And in fact, that probably is not going to take too long. I know that a lot of emphasis is being placed on 1970 itself and the state of emergency and so on. But within recent times, doing an interview with a sister who is doing some work on the period, it began occurring to me that the 1970s, those years, are extremely important, and that the National Joint Action Committee, the work that was done in the various areas of the districts of Trinidad and Tobago, in the communities, that we ought to spend some time looking at what we did in those small groups that used to meet under a street light or in the back of some house or something like that, late in the night, talking, teaching one another, trying to explain to one another what our situation was, planning to write because we understood the importance of education, and there were, I must find out how many leaflets, pamphlets that there were from each particular grouping in the north, in the south, area groupings in the north and the south, all over Tobago. And the things that we wrote about and how we connected with our communities through those area leaflets that each had a different name. I belong to the East Dry River community, and we had East Dry River Speaks. And we did speak, and it was an interaction. Those little things that look like little rags now, I went into a box that I have in my home, and I saw a whole lot of them. What I want to say is that has died down. I heard Brother Winston talking about, how certain things fell by the wayside. But I think that was an opportunity when we communicated with each other, both within the organization and between the organization and the people in the communities through various media, whether it be these pamphlets that I was talking about, or through little rallies that we had in the various communities. Somehow, I feel that there has to be a way in which we could build back that sense of connecting with one another to talk about our own business. So thanks to Sister Josanne for organizing this evening. I think it was important. That is all I had to say. It's just that those meetings late in the night and so on have been resonating in my head, and I just want to tell everybody about it. Thanks a lot.
And so now you understand why the book of photographs is aimed at the 1970s. It's the decade of the 70s, and you will be rewarded before the end of the year.
Does it not sound like a shameless plug? I mean, how many times is man telling us about this book and what is coming? Yeah, we have some readings, we have some drummings, but we also have, we have to cap off. I'd like to ask Ayagoro Ume to share some words with us, and I also know Clyde Weatherhead and Ozzie Merrick in terms of an input in terms of a reading. So we don't want to drag it out. Ayagoro, would you share a few words coming up? You could come up or you could sit right here.
I'll sit up. Good evening, everyone, or good night. I'm not sure what time of evening or night we are at now. But I want to thank Sister Josanne Leonard for having organized this occasion. And well, I just came from the NJAC event, which is down at the SWWTU Hall. And I spoke sort of briefly down there because I intended to be at both of these events today. I made reference to an article I did in yesterday's Guardian in which I stated that it was very gratifying that there were at least 2 events which were looking at the anniversary, the 40th anniversary of April 21st, 1970. And I did so in the context that I felt everyone or anyone has the right to recall and to analyze that very significant date and those very significant events in our history. So that my concern is that we should have had even more opportunities to speak about what took place then. And I made actually 2 recommendations when I spoke at the NJAC offices, at the NJAC event. Incidentally, I should let you know that I am no longer the president of NJAC. I retired 2 years ago, and I also resigned from my position as head of the cultural committee. But I keep a very active interest in all things that are important for our people. And I said when I spoke a short while ago that one of the things that ought to be done is that events like this should be taken to every school in Trinidad and Tobago. And I did that in the context that we are not able to have 1970 literally born again. We can't do everything that was done then. Sister Olabisi made reference to certain things, the sense of communication and so on. But I believe very strongly that there's need for a rejuvenation of the spirit of the 70s. And part of that has to do with what I heard said earlier on by Brother Sweet. And he made reference to what is happening at UWI and what is happening with young Africans and so on. I agree to a great extent with what he said. But I felt a very important element was left out of the discussion, as though, even though I know it's very important to look at the reality that is facing Africans. I know when you go to UWI, you are not going to see the enrollment of many Africans there. And I think he stopped short of saying that the enrollment of Indian women is phenomenal. And I don't think people have analyzed why have Indian women risen to the point in academia way above all the other cohorts in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that needs to be looked at very seriously. My concern with April the 21st, however, is also based on the fact that it is one of the events in our history when the unity of Africans and Indians was frustrated. It happened way back in the 1880s with the so-called Jose riots, which we now call the Jahaji massacre, when Africans and Indians, Africans played a big part in Jose in the 19th century, and they were seeking to come to San Fernando. And the San Fernando Gazette said that if that joint crowd of Africans and Indians came to San Fernando, it would have been the end of British colonialism in Trinidad. That was written. About 22 plus Indians were killed on that day by the authorities. You come to the 30s, you have the same thing. People keep writing out of the history the role that Indian immigrants played on the estates with the strikes and revolts, and they killed white people as well. We also had the Kambule riots. And then you look at what happened in 1970. We marched under a banner Indians and Africans unite. Thousands of Africans went to central Trinidad. Not scores, not hundreds. Thousands went. And it is a return march which would have come from central Trinidad to Port-au-Spain, led eventually to Eric Williams declaring the state of emergency. We have to look at the hurdles that we have had to transcend as we move towards having a truly united nation. So my concern is we look at these matters, we look at the question of the rejuvenation, and I want to see events such as this taken to the schools. Thank you very much.
We have a little more camaraderie, we have sharing, we have children of the revolution here who's pulling, but I must give Clyde Weatherhead an opportunity to come and share some of his thoughts as is a real soldier boy. You can have a seat.
Good night, brothers and sisters. I have a few things to share because I have learned from my wife that you don't visit people and not share things. So the bibliography which I have done, I have about 40 copies of it, and they will be available to you. And I want to give to Sister Josanne Leonard a CD that I put together today, Renaissance Music of the 70s. And actually it features 7 leaders of the Renaissance of that time in Trinidad and Tobago. Lance, Ella, Sundar Popo, Mongol Patesa, Andre, Valentino, and Stalin. I wrote about that Renaissance some years ago and sent it, and I think the TT Review published it. And I recall 1970 myself, and I want to just make a point that none of us were born big. Nor was 1970 born big. 1970, as Winston said, grew out of some things. And only recently, in discussion with Roger Toussaint, who was the leader of the New York Transport Workers, we worked together as students at St. Mary's College during 1970. We organized together. And Roger reminded me that in New York, recently, they organized a showing of Zeno Constance's play, The Roaring '70s. And to introduce that play, which ran for a few nights, they actually had a session like this the night before it started. So one of the things that we have to recall is that prior to 1970, and I want to speak a little bit about Dagger, because there's an aspect of Dagger's life that has already been written out of the history books. And that is the fact that in 1962, Geddes Granger founded an organization called Pegasus. And Pegasus created a number of committees to deal with arts, to deal with culture, to deal with sports, to deal with social issues. And then they developed a project called Project Independence. And they also developed a project, Port of Spain, which was to redesign and re-energize this almost dead city that we are in right now. And at every stage of that organization, hundreds of Trinidadians and Tobagonians came together to discuss these issues and to develop plans for this country, right after the Declaration of Independence. So we were in the forms of a nation-building project, not led by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And the first set of awards that were given by Pegasus were to the artists. The second set were given to others who contributed otherwise, and they were actually given on Independence Day, long before the government had any national awards. And in fact, when the government introduced national awards, Pegasus held its own awards. The government had their own in the morning in those days, and they had their own in the afternoon. And everything that they did to show people that in this country, we have the ability to address our problems independent of those who wish to impose agendas on us. Because people came together, they volunteered their time and effort in all of these projects. This group also organized what we now have in a dying way, the Model United Nations, because they first organized debates among the secondary schools. And I don't know if we recall Salisha Ali. She was part of the first team that won the first debate. The other person was A.N.R. Robinson's daughter. So those things, they were introduced. And at the age where Geddes went into the university, it was to further what he was doing through Pegasus. And every step they took, the government either tried to frustrate it or tried to take it over and did nothing about it. Their sports committee came up with the idea of the National Stadium for Trinidad and Tobago, not the government. And would you believe, right now I live in Trin City, and the company that was developing Trin City gave land to Pegasus Sports Committee for the purpose of erecting a national stadium. The government took over the project, and there was no stadium. So I think that experience, which tells us that we can govern ourselves. And I recall Daga in the last few years, when he was part of the People's Partnership and otherwise, at every meeting, he would remind all of us, put your hand on your chest and say, I am the government. Because we, as a people, can govern ourselves. But we have been taught that we must cede that ability to some people we call politicians. And there is a danger right now in Trinidad and Tobago. I know we all speak tonight about documenting the history. But the Prime Minister of this country, Dr. Keith Rowley, has told us since 2015 that he is setting out to revise the history of this country and document it so that our young children going to school will never understand our own history. And I think that is a grave danger to us in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is something we can only counter by presenting the real history of Trinidad and Tobago. Many of the things that Pegasus did continued through NJAC, and they have continued otherwise since then. As a student at the university, we formed in the 70s, later part of the 70s, what we call a research group in the Faculty of Agriculture that actually went and did work for farmers. And we wrote a history of Tobago, which I recently shared with some neighbors of mine, including a Tobagonian, who didn't even know some of the things that are in there. So we have to deal with presenting our own history from our own standpoint. And we have also to prepare to let politicians know that we can form an agenda. Pegasus showed us that, and we can do it in 2018. We don't have to sit down and wait till some election in 2020 for somebody to tell us where Trinidad and Tobago going. We begin that discussion today. It's been going on, and we have to further it. That is what we are about if we are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago.
This is for you to share, is it?
Yes.
Ozzy Warwick, where are you? Our gracious host for the evening, the OWTU, but with collaboration from the Communications Workers Union, as members from the National Workers Union. Afra Raymond is raising his hand, Shabaka Kambon and my daughter Ayana from Children of the Revolution, Attila Music. We're going to have that interspersed, but we're going to have a reading from you. And in fact, this book is for those of you who walk with some money. It's on special. Ozzy, you can tell them. It's Kafra's book, and he said he can sign. He can do some book signings.
Sisters and brothers, comrades all, good evening. I know it's a little bit late, but we're celebrating a very important and historical moment. Sisters and brothers, comrades all, good evening. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union to welcome you to this historic Lenox Pierre Auditorium. And let me say it is also an honor to be the first speaker here who was born after 1970. But I want to say to you all that the spirit and fire of the 1970 revolution still lives on in our next generation of revolutionaries. I see my good comrade Attila Springer was here, Shabaka is here, Rubaderi, Nicole. There's a whole new generation of young people who will be carrying on that battle and carrying on that fire. This book, For Bread, Justice and Freedom, a political biography of George Weeks by none other than Kafra Kambon. And I would suggest that each one of us purchase this book, because it's not just a biography in terms of dates and times, but rather it gives context. It gives a critical analysis of the period. And I heard many speakers talk about the importance of documenting and writing our own history. Well, Kafra Kambon has given us a true gem. He has given us an opportunity to continue to build on that spirit of the 1970 revolution. I really suggest that each and every one of us get a copy of this book, For Bread, Justice and Freedom, a political biography of George Weeks by Kafra Kambon. So thank you, Kafra, on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago for giving us this important gem. I will be short. I will just read a few short passages. First is chapter 12, and the title of chapter 12 is Revolution. And here is a quote from George Weeks. And then suddenly it sweeps on you like a thief in the night. What? Not elections, but revolution. And the wretched of the earth stand up, realize that though they don't have bread or enough of it, they have feet, and 2 of them. And they start to walk about the place. And they realize that though they don't have guns or tear gas, they have fists. And they start to clench them and throw them in the air. And they realize that though they don't have walkie-talkies, nor even one good microphone, they have voices. And they start to shout, power, power, power to the people. A quote by George Weeks, start of chapter 12. And I go to chapter 13, title, A Test of My Manhood. The phone rang shortly after 4 a.m. on April 21st, 1970. At that hour, it was either a threat or trouble. Somehow, Weeks knew it was trouble, and he was involved. Lenox Pierre at the other end of the line told him that they have just picked up who? Dabo. No need to explain who they were. Weeks got himself moving as quickly as he could and drove to Leonard's home. Was it something Dabo did yesterday? Or was this the anticipated state of emergency? This was the trend of discussion as he met with Granger and Leonard. It was wiser to treat it as the emergency unless or until it could be determined otherwise. Weeks and Leonard went to the OWTU office while Granger waited behind. He asked them to arrange transportation to get him out of San Fernando to the north, where the base was stronger. By the time Weeks and Leonard reached the Paramount building, a police car pulled up behind them. The sergeant asked Weeks to accompany him to the station. The superintendent wanted to talk to him. Weeks told him his office would be a more convenient place. When the police continued to press him, he insisted that if they did not have a warrant, he was not going. They left the premises and radioed the station. Weeks went into his office. He picked up the phone and alerted Kelshall. Kelshall was packed and on the next plane to England that day. At his age, prison was no place to be. But Weeks and Leonard would not get a chance to leave OWTU office on their own. The police outside was soon joined by reinforcements, and they needed no warrant. 36 armed men sufficed. Leonard was also given an invitation. He could not refuse to join the talks. There was no point arguing other legal details at 6 a.m. in an empty OWTU office. Another piece of the same chapter. April 21st, 1970, turned out to be a day of heroism for Trinidad and Tobago, the full story of which would emerge for Weeks and other detainees, only over a long period of time. More snippets were added to what they picked up in prison after he and Leonard were taken to Nelson Island by Coast Guard boat at just about 5 o'clock that afternoon. Weeks had now landed on the same island where his hero had been brought in 1939, like him, a prisoner without charge. Weeks could not dwell then on the historic connection. His first preoccupation was with the present, the stories some detainees had to tell, those kidnapped later in the day who were part of the fray in the city before it broke up. Over the coming days, he would learn more as others were detained. And my final piece is the end of that chapter, the last paragraph. Every act of struggle, every affirmation of the rightness of the goals of the revolution, every demonstration of support was a mitigation of the test that was the 1970 detention. Therefore, though it was a test which some failed, for a man with Weeks' fighting spirit, ideological commitment, and experience, it was not just a grave test. When he was finally let out of the prison doors on November 17th, and he walked down Freedom Road, as Frederick Street was unofficially renamed, he had every right to feel satisfied that he had passed this test, but the real trials were yet to come. This is a short reading of the classic For Bread, Justice, and Freedom, a political biography of George Reese by Kafra Kambon, as we say, forward ever, backward never, forward ever, backward never, long live the 1970 revolution.
Shabaka, Ayana, Attila, and my compeers, the secondary school students. Seiko is here, Dennis is here, Terrence is here. I think Martin was here. Come. Rubadiri. Anybody who consider themselves young. So I'm center stage. They will share as the evening goes on. Where's Attila? There's my granddaughter, Jada. So we're not discriminating, but we recognize in all the younger people, Richard, Robert, all from homes, from parents. Ozzy, you're supposed to be up here because as you claimed, you're born after 1970. Mark Ataclan is here. So now we know we're going to get the music for sure. We were looking for Mawakil. He ain't reached yet, but you could come up here. Anybody who born after 1970, raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, Opesho, you don't count. Sati and, no? Okay. And I want to, and this is not a formal thing, but I also want to recognize, because we're streaming, because you see, we are the young people. Ola BC. Pamphlets and things, but we in the digital age. So as we speak, we are streaming on Facebook, facebook.com/streaming Caribbean. So for this whole proceedings has been live on Facebook. We're going to break up in a little while. I know, a C composer, did you walk with your guitar? Oh, so sorry. David, sorry. Sorry, Mark, and if Mawakil comes. But I'm going to just you know, we need to break up. People need to get up and stretch their legs. We have music to play. We need to communicate. We need to walk around. We need to do all these things. I don't want to give Shabaka the mic because then we'd be here whole night. Richard, very quickly for your dad.
Wow. Well, my brother and I were young at the time of 1970, but a lot of things that have happened in our lives after, whether it was passed on genetically, having to deal with unknown circumstance and finding a way to survive. I work in a strange area, but I always impact it with trying to do it almost iconoclastically, and to always revolutionize how I do what I do and to give people a voice. So I feel that in some kind of inherent way that has been passed on, I'm very Afro-conscious without even knowing where the origin of it is, because in everything that I do, I present that. I present that first. I also had the opportunity of working with my aunt, Jean Coggin Simmons, who is a folk heroine. And so the culmination of the unionist perspective and the folklore and the understanding that folk is important for us to move forward unites what I do. And I'm very proud to be here to be part of this process.
No. Yeah, let me say something quick. Yeah, I just want to quickly touch on, first of all, let me just salute all the elders here in the appropriate manner. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. And you get to do the next part? Go ahead. Forward ever.
Forward ever.
Backward never. Right. We want to salute all the elders here, all those who sacrificed to make a better society for us to enjoy today, the things that we enjoy today. Let me just say that there's one aspect of the struggle that has not yet been documented. Usually when you read about 1970, there are two different time periods. One is that it was a 3-month event. And the other one is that it started in 70, and by 1975 it was finished. You know, if you include NUF and so on. That was the precipitous decline after 70 up until about 75. Those of us who stand here today are testament to something else. Because some of us here were born into a living revolution. Revolution as a process. And we can argue that process outlived the 70s as a decade. Some of us were born 75 and after in that period. And just quickly to give you a sense, because by looking at that, you get a sense of the character, the ambition, and the scope of the revolutionaries in terms of what they wanted to achieve in the 70s. And let me just give you two things. We experienced certain institutions, those of us who are old enough. One was revolutionary school. The revolutionaries had set up school for their children. You see a lot of the images of children in the background there. After 1970, there were all kinds of institutions, cultural, religious, etc. But revolutionary school is one that was interesting, and I have some of the texts that I wanted to bring here today. And let me say that A was not for apple, and G wasn't for games, and R certainly wasn't for rice or rain. You know, these words had different meanings in revolutionary school. There's also a language that we experienced in the 1970s, the kids of the 1970 revolution. Because so many of our parents, as revolutionaries, would have been sort of kicked out of their families. I'm not calling any names. They're blood relatives. Quickly, they're blood relatives. They came up with a new discourse. So brother and sister, auntie and uncle didn't mean those people you were related to by blood. But all these people here, you see around me, they were all family. And the beautiful thing I could say about that the way we reinterpreted language, we also reinterpreted some important words that the society would later take from us. Negro and coolie were pejorative terms. That was part of the new discourse that we were brought up in. Let me just point out one other institution. So we had a a new type of family, and let me say that I'm happy to say that a lot of those family relations continue till today. There's another institution. It was called the African Belief System for those people of African descent in the revolution. And a lot of people who would have gone to school in this generation would have written that onto their papers when they went into school. You know, when they asked us what our religion was, and we said, well, we were from the African Belief System, and you can see the quizzical expressions on teachers' faces and student faces and so on. But that spoke to the ambition of the revolutionaries of that period. They tried to create all the institutions that they would need to keep this revolutionary thing going well, decades and decades into the future. And so I just mentioned those two institutions today, but I want us to remember, now when we think about 1970, not as a 3-month event, not as a 5-year event, but as an event, as the revolution, as a process that outlived the 70s. And in time, we'll have more time to discuss some of those things. And let me pass this on to my sister now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shabaka. Like Shabaka, I just want to say thank you to our elders, our fathers, mothers, uncles, aunts, people whose kitchens we ate food in. If one of us was eating, everybody was eating. And you know, Shabaka just gave like a very polite historical analysis of our childhoods. And it was not always that easy. We had these strange names. We got laughed at for our names. We had funny clothes. We got laughed at for our clothes. I clearly remember being in a geography lessons class in Bishops in Form 5 and walking in a head tie, and a girl as black as I am pointed at me and laughed for a good 10 minutes at the sight of me in a head tie. So this is the kind of thing that we had to deal with. Interestingly, the same sister who pointed and laughed at me, 10 years later, she was going through this whole natural hair journey. And I was like, yeah, been there, done that. And to bring it to a contemporary context, a couple months ago when Black Panther came out, there was this huge outpouring of, you know, excitement about Africanness. And I went on this television show and I was like, well, you know, I've been living this way since the 70s. And, you know, all the people who laughed at us when it was 10 of us walking down the street, Emancipation morning, from up Duke Street, are now the same people dressing up to go to Movie Town to watch a film that has commercialized the Pan-African ideology that we lived in our homes and our parents got locked up for, and our grandparents got nervous breakdown for. We are seeing all these things come to fruition now. And, you know, it comes with a bit of bittersweet sadness, a sense of loss, a sense of joy, a sense of told you so, a sense of we didn't have to go through all the pain that we went through, but it was for a reason. So, you know, again, thank you. I was in a film the other day also about natural hair, and all the other people who were interviewed in this film talked about the traumatic experiences they had as children with their parents and their grandparents hating the way that their hair was. And I was the only person in the film who could talk about the fact that I had 2 older sisters who fought to comb my hair, you know, and who every day celebrated my hair. And so now when I walk down the street and people are like, oh, your hair's so nice, your hair's so nice, and they want to put their hand in my hair, and it's like, why don't you know what the texture of your hair feels like? And you're now in your 40s having to rediscover what the texture of your hair feels like. So for the freaks and the outsiders of the 70s, which is what we were, which is what you all were, the freaks and the outsiders, we told you so. Well done. Thank you. Thank you for sticking to your guns. Thank you for not surrendering. Because there were many times when I'm sure it would have been easy to surrender. And we lost a lot of people as well. We lost a lot of people to an easier life, to the church, to none wanting to accept anything to do with any kind of Africanness, any kind of black powerness, because the trauma is real. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk to with Josanne, with Robert, is about we have trauma that we need to deal with. And you know, when we talk about the collapse of our communities, we do not confront the trauma that was part of the destruction of our communities, because they had to make sure that these ideas did not take hold. It would not have served their purposes to have strong communities, because then you do not have easy people to vote for you, right? So we have to look at the trauma that was left behind. We have to understand that trauma that was left behind. And in everything, whether it is environmental justice, social justice, gender-based violence, it does not matter. The remnants and the fragments of colonial violence are still with us, and we need to confront those things. And having conversations about 1970 is part of that conversation, and understanding that within the greater context of our history of fighting against colonial violence.
And let me just say, as we end this little man here is 8 years old, and I would be happy if any of the people standing here, and I see Uncle Chi there, as there was a Children of the Revolution, if he was to take after any of these people here, because as coming out as Children of the Revolution, I think one thing we all have in common is we do not sleep to dream, but dream to change the world. Thank you.
All right, again, salutations to the ancestors, the elders in our midst, and those who have paved the way. We stand on the shoulders of giants. I just want to say on the question of memory and the importance of memory, and you know, Trinidad and Tobago is this amnesia country that destroys its heroes and destroys memory. I am the leader of the Artists Coalition of Trinidad and Tobago, and for 17 years we tried to lobby government for the creation of certain institutions and those kind of things. And like many others before us, found that government and the public sector are not partners in anything progressive. And so we have arrived at the place that we have to build it ourselves. So a lot of the energy that we would have placed into lobbying government, we are now putting into one singular institutional project that will come to fruit later on this year, and we're asking for partnership with everyone here. And that is the creation of the National Hall of Fame, or the National Portrait Gallery. It will be the place that is the custodian space for the memory of the country. And we have an archive that we have been collecting over the years of hundreds of thousands of images of our elders, our heroes, ancestors, and those kinds of things. Their stories. We've been documenting the stories of elders, memoir length, and a lot of them, people here, some of those who have passed recently. And it will be a citizen-led initiative. This is not a government, has nothing to do with this initiative, right? The centerpiece of it will be this archive that we have, the audiovisual archive that we have, and artifacts that we have. And it will be a home for like all these different kinds of things that are here and plus, right? And so we're asking, the call will go out, and I'm asking for all of you present to respond to that call, because it will be built by us for us. And we collectively will own and run and administer this space. And so that's what I have to say is that I believe that that is the nerve point institution that can shift the sensibility of the nation by reminding us when we stand in awe of ourselves and the things that we have done as a people, reminding ourselves, we did that, and for generations and generations to come, a permanent space and a virtual space that will exist as testimony to the victories that we have won. Ashe.
Just 2 minutes, 1 minute. The space that, with the violence that is happening, how we men hold on to male domination as an inherent right to how we should be. And how that has affected our lives and how we continue to affect other people's lives by that, and how we fight to find a little bit of honor and respect by eradicating each other. We have to look at the trauma, as Attila said, and the only way that can happen is with deep interrogation of our own childhoods. Each one of us here has stories of isolation. Which was just saying, we were in meetings like this for hours, being left bored, what that could do to young people's minds. But we just have to look at this differently. That's it.
Okay, so we have, people are tired, we have music, we have communion. I would really, I don't know why my brethren from Noah's, Sekou and
yes, Dejiasu's daughter.
Legi's daughter. But I'm trying to get those boys from behind. I don't know why Ole behaving so bashful. And Terrence. Dennis. So I think this is Diego Martin Secondary. Where's Leslie? He gone? Bowrin? Woodbrook Secondary. Dennis. Belmont, what, intermediate? Chi? All I can tell you is that when we met 2 years ago, and we got to wrap it up, that we all felt very strongly that that memory and reflection, but also going forward, is something that we committed to. So this is a very small step, and I'd really like Schoon, Wim. He's still sitting down there quiet, the man who I could never get on the phone. Fareed Schoon. I want to thank all of the partners and collaborators here this evening because everybody came on board very quickly. We knew that we had to commemorate. There's a lot of work to go on. There's the scholarship work, there's the historical work, there's the political work, there's the cultural work. This night couldn't be all things to all people. Merle Hodge, I didn't even realize you were sitting there. Welcome, sister. So I'd like to thank the OWTU, Ozzy, Sati, and the rest of the team. I'd like to especially thank Apesho Matupe because his diligence and his images are here and that we can discuss and we can celebrate. The National Library that gave us their 1970 exhibition. And every single person, CWU, Clyde Elder, Clyde Weatherhead, everybody responded very, very, very quickly. So we have work to do. We know we have work to do, but we're moving forward. We want to thank everyone, the Cambons. If I've missed anyone, it's because I'm tired and I'm just painfully aware that we need to let you all get up and stretch your legs and mix and mingle, and we're going to play some music. And I don't know who and walk with their cooler. Well, tough, because me had to go around. They had to go around the corner to buy some drinks. But I want to let Mark Ataclan, as somebody coming out of that time, begin to take us out into when we begin to exhale a little more. Okay?
But I'm not going to do any talking. Ella, good evening. Just going to do a piece called Naked Walk, because I guess tonight we had a lot of naked truth. Goes like this. There's a reason for the seasons, a reason if it snows, a reason for a river and the places that it flows, a reason for the rain, a reason for the pain, knowing deep inside my soul that I would rise again. 'Cause the more I listen, is the more I hear, and the more I learn, is the less I fear. And the more I feel, is the more I care. And the more them fakers dress it up, is the less I wear. 'Cause I like to walk naked, naked I like to walk. Naked away from Wall Street paintings and poets buying yards of fabric. To make pretty the rhythmic talk. Make pretty the rhythmic talk. To make pretty the rhythmic talk. But let me hear you chant with me now. Badam, badam, dam, dam. They full me head with lead and pump me mind with ink. Tell me never to grow a dread, 'cause that's the right way to think. They teach me foreign history till I don't know nothing about me. Still Africans can work in banks, yet they call that equality. Tell John Hopkins to hop a kite, buy some thread and fly away. Midnight Rubber and the 1970s is our history lesson today. Our history lesson today is our history lesson today. 'Cause I like to walk naked. Naked I like to walk, naked away from Wall Street paintings and poets buying yards of fabric. To make pretty the rhythmic talk, to make pretty. Come chant with me now, everybody. There's a reason for the seasons, a reason if it snows, a reason for a river, and the places that it flows, and the places that it flows.
And let us get a round of applause for Brother Knocker. Brother Knocker on the drums, who has been...
I'd like everybody a little symbolic something. Can we all stand and can we all sort of interlock? When we were marching, we used to lock hands, and now it's not that we're marching physically, but we continue the march of self-actualization, shaping our own destiny. Come on, everybody fall in. Everybody fall in. And come closer, because we have cameras and things too, so.
No, I have to be moving about.
Oh, you're going to move about, okay. Circle of we all will do our part for Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. A circle that we recommit ourselves and not just look after our own self-interests or our own personal or partisan ideologies. That this circle represents that we believe that we, the people, can shape our own destiny, and we work together in unison from disparate ways. Is there anything anybody wants to send up? Okay. Where's Attila and the music? I don't know. Is there something anybody wants to shout out? Anybody wants to get a chant? Tell me. We'd like to take one moment here, a moment to remember all of those who have gone, and there are many of them, not just those who were in the top line leadership of the various movements and organizations.
You give them an inch, they take a whole
So a moment for our brothers and sisters who've traveled on.
Shaka Agaja.
Winston Leonard.
Clifton Paul.
Sana Kwesi.
Chet Swayo.
Oscar Johnson.
George Weeks.
Wayne Davis.
Nuevo Diaz.
Raya Butler.
Seloa.
Emmanuel.
Beverly Johnson.
Lennox Spear.
Beverly Jones.
Lennox Spear.
Sierra G.
Gregory Brody.
Michael Alice.
Kwame Ture.
Alan Alexander.
Jack Kelshaw.
Macandel Jacket.
Desmond Allen.
Joe Young.
Alan Alexander.
Michael Davis. Teddy Belgrave. Larry Belgrave.
Abbas Lavi. Elmer Francois. Remy George.
George Weeks. Uncle Gaddafi and Sister Rosetta.
Dennis Spanton.
Janice Leonard.
Nelson Mandela.
Winnie.
Winnie Mandela. Winnie Mandela.
Lloyd Best.
Yeah, Lloyd Best.
Kwame Ture.
Patrice Lumumba.
Maurice Bishop.
Fidel Castro.
Jackie Craig.
Che Guevara.
Walter Rodney. Martin Luther King.
Maurice Bishop.
Jomo Kenyatta. Miriam Makeba.
Chief Thomas Simmons.
Jesus. Hugo Chavez.
Yes. Sharon Byron.
Correct.
He said this prayer.
Keith Shepard.
Ken Morris.
Thelma Williams.
Thelma Henderson.
Ubundeku Orishabini.
Ubali Raya Boss Butler.
Yuri Kodari.
Diran Timati.
Lanston Lane.
Tracy Wilson. Clara Wilson.
Liz Dasu Mwale.
Brian Honoré. John LaRose. Andrew Tanka.
Ebenezer Elliott.
Melvina Rodney. Jim Barrett.
Jaja Kogaku.
Christina King.
Sam Fells.
Chief and Sheriff Shango. Basil Davis.
Ex-soldiers.
All the ex-soldiers. All the ex-soldiers.
Tunumai, Kausilia Banwari.
Sapesha, you want to take us out?
Henry Sylvester Williams.
All right, so that's it? Yeah.
Dr. Pulaski's father.
John Michael Brooms. George Bailey.
Mighty Terrell.
Claude Sweet, Andrew Bedu,
Andre Tanker,
Jeffrey Bedu,
John Henry Clark,
Joseph Benyukana,
Eugene Chan.
and we could go on, we could take the rest in our hearts. Let's just all say whatever you want to say at this point. Now we're going and boogie a little bit. We're going to listen to some calypso and drums and whatever it is and just wrap up the evening. But just thank you, everyone. We're going to put a book there for those of you who may want to sign your names and contact numbers and so we can keep connected. From visual art, is he still in the room? Timmy Mora is a boss videographer, director, and is an archivist in his own right. Please give a round of applause to Timmy. To Randall, Robert, and Kevin, who provided a live stream for Facebook, so everything is going to be there and continuous. And to Peter Schoon and Media 21 for providing the PA system for us. Please give these brothers a round of applause because not 1 cent. They came, they put the time in, we have documentation now, and then a reminder that everybody else who came, their books, a couple of books on sale and there's some literature. You could move the chairs, we're going to hang about and all talk a little bit.
But I want to tell, I want to hear from this university that transformation is not something to fear. Transformation is progress.
Our living and learning spaces should be diverse and inclusive for all. Look at the program as what you see
This is about changing our relationship to history. This is about deciding what values are appropriate to honor and which values we cannot continue to venerate in our society moving forward into the future. And so, if we look around, our public spaces in our cities in particular are littered with unjust historical figures that celebrate the worst values. That celebrate the worst values of the colonial period, which was a horrendous period. And we have made it our mission to end that and to begin to venerate people like people whose names we call today, who can contribute something positive to the next generation. As you can see by the trailer, we take our inspiration from Brother Franz Fanon. We didn't call his name today, but he said before he died, imperialism leaves behind germs of rot, which we must clinically detect and remove not just from our lands, but from our minds as well. That's our moral imperative. Thank you very much. Please check out the website.